Hello, welcome to FAQ episode 6. So if you've been following along and putting your questions in, we really appreciate it. We want to get to them all, but we're busy and we can't get to everyone. Today, I think we picked some pretty good ones. We're gonna have more grows after this, and our intention is to get to every single one of these questions. We even have some plans to do a single FAQ on some of the more detailed questions, and those will be coming out in the near future. And the first question I'm gonna answer today, it might lend itself to one of those more detailed ones, but I'll try and do my best. Let's just jump in right now. First question was from Marty, and he says, I never see you move your lights the entire grow. Do you leave them in one position? Do you adjust them and turn them up all the way to that position once you're there? Thank you. And okay, really good question. I used to move lights a lot, and it's a pain, especially when you get to like LEDs where there's 4 points of hanging. You can't just reach and just pull one cord and have the light go up and down. And so when your canopy really gets full, especially when it's in a corner, you kind of want to pre-plan this stuff so that you're not trying to float your body across a 5-foot canopy with a stick to adjust one of those rope ratchet things. So that's a consideration. What we did is we used a very potent grow light. We put it all the way at the top of the ceiling and we just let it run from that point forward. It's not the most energy efficient. Because LEDs are efficient, it made it time efficient for me to just walk in and do what I need with the lights all the way up. But if I was on a budget in an expensive electrical location where every single penny counted, I would definitely dim the lights, drop the lights, and I would operate based on the science of what the plants need, where what I did was make it easy for me. And you can do that when you know the rules. So let me explain some basics, and then I'm gonna defer to saying we will record a more specific video on what's called DLI, Daily Lighting Integral. And in that video, we will be discussing the PAR, the PPFD, some of those terms. But in layman's terms, let me lay it out for you. If you have a light that's super bright and on the ceiling, more than likely, you're gonna be in a optimal range for light because it's on full blast. When you get the light all the way in the ceiling and your plants are low, it might lower the amount of light they receive so much so that you don't maximize your yield. But it is less pressure, it's less demand on the plants to work so hard, so it's an easier grow. If we wanted, I'm just gonna use round numbers. You could get a lot more specific, but let's say 1,000 PAR was the most intense amount of light you wanted on your plants during a 12-hour day. That's how long flowering is. Well, the 12 hours is part of it. So if you're running for 12 hours and you have 1,000 PAR or PPFD for your intensity, that means that you're getting 1,000 for 12 hours. That formula relates to DLI. Cannabis plants like to be at around 40 on the DLI. There's some arguments there, but essentially that formula of intensity of light and the number of hours it's running gives you a number that the plants will probably like. Some plants like less, some plants like more. And so once you know that number, you can kind of hack the system. For instance, in the back right quadrant, quadrant 3, we have 10-gallon pots with 1 cubic foot of soil in there, and we've been top dressing. So if I had the lights lowered at that 1,000 level with no supplemental CO2 and the schedule that I'm on, they would be drinking water about 2 times a day. Right now, I have to get in there every single day and water them. So the weaker link for me was watering, and I didn't want to have unhealthy plants, so I just left the light jacked to the ceiling. And when I read the PAR, it's about half as potent as it could be, but I'm still getting a great yield because it's full spectrum. It's just more than I need out of there. However, if I'm really trying to go max yield, I've got a cutting that I've run before. I know how tall it's gonna get. Ideally, you would keep the PAR at a perfect level. Whether your light's higher or lower, you would be optimizing that. And then you can actually increase the intensity of lighting if you can increase the CO2 and have the optimal humidity and have the right amount of food and soil. So without having to get perfect, it's easier to just lower things a little bit. And so that's why I just left the lights on the ceiling, let them do whatever they want. I've got 10 gallons over here and a 3x3 over here and earth boxes over here. It was easy to leave them all in the same position. If you have the time, if you have the ability to lower your light, you can literally get that light a lot closer, measure the PAR. Those cypresses you can get within about 6 inches and still be in that 1,200 PAR range, which is not too much. So that's an idea. In veg, the plants are even further away, but in veg you're running 18 hours. So you can have less light because there's more hours, and that's why we talk about DLI. So I'm gonna go too far on this if I just keep talking, but we're gonna make a special video on DLI where we're gonna give you the tools so you can calculate these decisions on your own. Essentially, those LEDs are powerful enough to hit a number that I'm happy with, so I just jacked them to the ceiling and I cranked them up. It wasn't the most efficient. I could certainly lower the lights and dim them, but that's a pain in the ass for me, and they're big lights, so I'd rather just leave them. That's the short answer. Throughout this entire grow, I've left those lights in the same position and everything looks really good. So hope that answers your question. I'm gonna move on to the next one. Next question is from Anthony. He says, hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. I was wondering if you could tell us how long worm castings will last and how to care for it when you have extra you aren't using right away. Specifically in the terms of both the Colorado Worm Company and other worm castings, thank you in advance. Really good question. I'm glad we pulled this one out today. I don't want people to be scared to buy a product like that and have it sit around. Some people think that they want to cure the worm castings and they get better with age. A lot of times you'll go to like a farm where the guy's been making his own compost for a while and they're kind of proud of their 10-year-old compost versus their this season compost. So with that being said, if you leave them out in the sun in a pile to get rained on, leached out, eaten by the birds and burned by the sun, but if they're in a bag in your garage, they should just get better with time. The only thing that may happen is they might lose a little bit of its diversity of bacteria and fungi and everything that comes straight out of the worm bin. But once you introduce that to your soil, you moisten it, and you put plant roots in there, it should really kick back off with a ton of probiotics. So fresh, I would say, is better for biology, but aged worm castings can still provide all of the NPK that we're looking for in great diversity, and it will add some life still that will start to grow from it. So I wouldn't be too scared if I bought, let's say, Colorado Worm Company castings in particular. I've had a bag sitting in a garage for 6 months and it's still perfect. The main reason is that one in particular has a little bit more of like a soil texture. It's not super like manure fluffy. It's actually got some clay in it. And so it holds moisture. So as long as you roll the bag down, when you open it, I've found like worm colonies and rove beetles and all the stuff even 6 months later. And that's because it wasn't in the sun and because it was indoor and that was a moist one. It actually had the right amount of moisture in it and it was in a bag so it didn't go dry. But I've found other companies like Wiggle Worm and stuff like that, it's almost dry when you get it. And then when you put it in the garage for a while, it just kind of turns whitish and it like starts to go off a little bit. Even that being said, I would never hesitate to use any castings if they were old. I would just tell myself it may not be quite as alive and abundant as the fresh ones, but it wouldn't stop me from buying them. With our BuildASoil castings, they're not the Coco, we buy those by the truckload and they're bulk process screened sent to us and we get a truckload, we use it that week, so they're still pretty fresh, but the process is different. Because they're making for scale and they have a very duplicatable process, it's not as slow and you don't get this outdoor compost pile that develops all these predators and rove beetles and worms, and they're better at screening. So because Coco is like a home business, you get the worm cocoons and the worms and the rove beetles and all that stuff. And I think if you go on Craigslist and find like the local worm dude, you'd probably find just as good you'd find a good local product that would be alive. But what I've found is I would rather use a 2-year-old bag of Coco that is completely bone dry than a fresh bag of an inferior product, because Coco is so full of nutrients, it's gonna go a lot further and I get a better reaction. So just in general, with worm castings, with any compost, the goal is to use it when it is moist and alive. That doesn't mean it needs to be yesterday. It does sometimes get better with age and you can reactivate it. In fact, Microbe Man, Tim Wilson, before he brews compost tea, he would throw some oats on top of his worm castings in the little bucket. He'd add a little bit of moisture, and that would, the bacteria and everything in the compost would start to activate on the oats and start to feed it and break it down, and it would really come alive. Then he would take that, start a tea with it, and then microscope it, and he said that he had a lot better results pre-activating his compost prior to use. So maybe that's a ticket. If you've got 6-month-old compost, got a little dry, put it in a bucket, add a little bit of moisture, maybe sprinkle some kashi blend or something like that in there and just let it come to life. Otherwise, I don't worry about it. I really feel like beginner growers oftentimes hear about living soil and they think anything they buy is just gonna die and it's not gonna be usable. Don't worry about it. Compost is usually very, very good. Worst case scenario, some of the life is missing, but better case scenario, if you take good care of it, it'll last a lot longer than you think, even with the life in it. So kind of a roundabout answer, but I did wanna just at least give you some confidence that you can use the older material and you don't have to buy like a gallon and freak out if you only use half of it. You can buy a cubic foot bag, use 1 scoop, and over the next year, use the rest of it. I hope that makes sense. Let's move on to the next question. Jason says, how do predator mites find their way into my home castings? Oh man, I have no idea. There's a couple answers that I have. There's going to be stuff that you just didn't know existed, especially if you eat organically, that will start to proliferate. And it may not be alive when you throw it in there, but the accumulation of apple peels and banana peels and waste product, there will be predator mites that come out, and there will be rove beetles. I don't know where the hell they come from. Nature is powerful. So when it comes to compost, I'd imagine typically in your home worm bin, if you're like me, I actually like to pull wild plants and put them in there. So wherever you live, you can buy a book. Here where I live, it's like the Edible Plants of the Rockies is the book that literally you open it up, go in your backyard or by the disc golf course or down by the park. You can just say, oh, that's a medicinal plant, and it grows wild, and you'll find them. Mullein grows here. There's a number of them that grow wild here. A lot of times I'll harvest those and put them in my worm bin. You're gonna get tons of predator mites and tons of different things from wild harvesting. If you're like putting the food scraps in, or if you have manures or anything like that, most of those beneficials are gonna come from outside, and then they're just gonna multiply once they're in the worm bin. But I'd have to do research, honestly. I've just kind of guessed because I've always putting different stuff in my worm bin. But if you start your own homemade worm bin and you put worms in it, I think even if you were like trying to keep it not to have any predator mites, they're going to get there. And I have no clue how sometimes. So good question, sparked a little bit of thought on my part. I'll do a little more research, see if I can come up with a better answer. But the short answer is nature finds a way. If you set up a worm bin and you put some heady inputs in there, you're gonna have more life than you anticipated, and you're gonna be wondering, like scratching your head where it all came from. If you go buy beneficials, you're gonna spend like $100, get this stuff shipped in and put it in your grow. And if you have a small amount of soil, you might kill your beneficials and you've just spent $100. But if you just start a worm bin, you're gonna get it all. And better yet, if you start a worm bin and put your beneficials in the worm bin, they're gonna be alive and you can constantly dose those out to the rest of your plants. So those are some considerations. Even if you buy worms, like a pound of worms to distribute to your containers, it's expensive, 30, 40 bucks. I would rather see you start a worm bin, even if it's with a few worms. They're gonna multiply and you're gonna have a perpetual source that's free to give to your other plants. And that's of great benefit. If you're an expert out there, you're watching this, you're like, oh, I know exactly where all the predator bugs come from. Answer on here. I want this to be more of a community thing. I don't know it all. I just research this stuff. And for whatever reason, I have a passion for research. So when I don't know something, I'm Googling it, I'm researching it, I'm reading 3 different books on it. And that typically leads me to an answer that's in the back of my mind that I can share with you guys. But if I don't know, I want to admit it. If you are an expert on this and you do know, maybe they're just coming from the worms that we get, right? Answer. I'd love to see what your thoughts are. Let's jump into the next question. So Barbell, I'm trying not to do the whole name, right? Just in case they've got like a personal account. But Barbell says, when is the CO2 mushroom hut going to start? Painful question. I wanted to do the CO2 mushroom hut this round. For those of you that have not followed along and may not know what he's asking about, we have a 4x4 tent that's next to the 10x10. And I've said for a while now that I'm gonna start growing mushrooms in it. Then I'm gonna duct the CO2 that's created by the mushrooms and put that into the 10x10. Well, several things had to happen. We've done all of them and we're ready, but I wanna finalize this answer. So in the 10x10, I needed to start measuring CO2 for the first time. Pulse reached out, gave us their Pulse Pro. They were super nice to do that. And if you saw the last episode, I actually did a review on the PAR meter that's built in. It worked very well. It was accurate between its own readings. It had a few like user issues, but for it being basically a freebie as part of their already built meter, I was excited to test it. And right away, I've been using the CO2 data to see what are regular beds of living soil that are in there, what the ebb and flow of CO2 is in a normal environment like that. So now next round, we're gonna do the mushroom hut. In fact, we've been growing mushrooms in there. Kevin grabbed some of the new mushroom logs that we're gonna be offering at BuildASoil.com, and he's been pre-testing them in the tent. We just didn't connect the ducting. And the reason why is we're still getting the baseline of info from the Pulse Pro. That'll tell us the CO2 reading the whole grow. And it was like mid-grow, we'd be throwing it in. We're not running high PAR on the lights, so the CO2 may not make as big of a difference. So we're gonna honor it, and I wanna do it right. We have these new mushroom growing kits, we have the logs. So by the time we get to the next round in the 10x10, it'll be super easy for me to turn on the mushroom growing tent, duct it in, and compare those CO2 numbers to this previous round that we're running right now, and then share that data with you. So the mushroom growing hut will not happen this round. It'll be in round 2 in the 10x10. It is coming, we're working on it. And the good news is there's gonna be an infinity item, like 1,000 more things to test in the future. And we just wanna honor all of them, do as many videos as we can because there's always questions about this stuff. So when it comes to these long-term plays like testing the CO2, running them in the 10x10, growing the mushrooms and actually collecting the data, it's It's because we want to empower organic growers. This is our mission, and we are organic growers, so I want the data. I know you want the data. There's only so many ways to test this, and on top of that, it's not even the most scientific testing. It's like one grow with one little mushroom tent. And so we're looking for outliers. Like if the CO2 clearly is higher across the board, I'm gonna share that with you. And I'd hope that one day in the future, we can do like full scientific tests using this as the seed of that, so that we can maybe fund it. But for now, if you subscribe, and you like this, and you watch along, and you're actually interacting with us, asking these questions, that's what's gonna lead to us answering these long, detailed questions over the next dozen grows. And so please do that, subscribe, we appreciate you. JJ says, would 5 plants in the 3x3 bed be pushing it, and if so, why? No. I would much rather see more plants in the 3x3, but I'm limited by plant numbers just like you are. We're running a business here, and I'm not going to push my plant numbers. But what I would do, if I were you, would be take a 3x3 and run 9 plants in it, 1 per square foot. And if they were all the same cutting and you've run them before and they get transplanted at the right height, you could literally veg for 3 to 5 days, flip to flower, have a full bed with great yield. And so typically more plants means less veg time, and veg time is a complete waste of money. Meaning if we're just trying to financially pin this down, all we want to do is flower as fast as we can, get the very best quality, do it again and again and again, as many times as you can in a year. For personal, it's more like, well, I don't want to produce too much and then not trim it and have it go bad because I didn't have time for it. So I want to produce enough that's manageable for me. But to me, I would rather have unlimited plant numbers, take my same bed, my same canopy, and I would much rather fill it with high plant numbers, shorten my veg time, flip the flower. Anytime you have less time in an entire run, you have less opportunity for problems, you have healthier plants. What would become a problem? Let's say I put the 5 plants you suggested, or the 9 plants I suggested, and I didn't shorten my veg time, and I overgrew a jungle in there. All I would be doing is taking more nutrients and creating more problems. And so the caveat is more plants, it should be driven faster. And if you're not willing to do that, just use less plants. I could have put 1 plant in the 3x3. The only difference would be that I'd have to veg until the whole canopy was full, which would have taken an extra 2 weeks versus the 4 plants. Plant numbers is the reason why you see a lot of people doing strange things. This poster behind me, massive 10-pound plus plants. That's because of plant numbers. The guy who grew that was like, well, I'm having 6 plants. I guess they're gonna be big, right? Or 12 plants, they better be huge. I'd say that these archaic laws we have create some really weird gardening practices. If you're comfortable with higher plant numbers, fill that bed up, pop it fast, and you'll be stoked on the results. One caveat, if you do like I do and you have 2 different genetics in there and one really cannibalizes the other, having more adds more diversity, so I would monocrop it if I'm running higher plant count. Hope that makes sense. And thanks for asking. I did mention we were gonna be doing some detailed single episode questions, DLI, I think pH is one of them. So if there's a question you know is just way too detailed and would take an hour to answer, throw it up. I wanna go down some rabbit holes and share all these details with you, because I feel like sometimes I answer a question and I'm literally leaving 90% of the conversation aside because that's not the important part. But if you're like me and you wanna just research, sometimes it's researching to understand the full picture, not just why we're doing the one thing. And so you can flip on a light switch and it works great, but some people wanna know like how the electricity flows, even though it doesn't matter to them that day. If you're like that, ask us those questions. We will get to the detailed ones, and I think we're gonna have some really good fun with it. So as always, appreciate you hanging out, answering the questions, watching me talk on video. And if you have any more of these, please post them up, subscribe, share them with your buddies, and we'll see you on the next episode.